There is a quiet kind of pain nobody warns you about. It doesn't arrive with chaos or drama. It arrives slowly, almost gently. One day, you look around and realize something has changed. The people who once felt like home now feel familiar, but distant. Not because of an argument, not because of betrayal, but because something inside you evolved. And the hardest part is this: you didn't leave anyone behind on purpose. You simply kept growing. Outgrowing people doesn't feel like winning. It feels like guilt. It feels like betrayal. Even when no one says it out loud. Because growth is supposed to be celebrated, right? That's what everyone tells you. Level up. Move forward. Become more. But no one talks about the emotional cost of becoming someone new while the people around you stay the same. At first, it's subtle. Conversations start feeling repetitive. The jokes don't land the way they used to. Your dreams are met with polite nods or quick changes of subject. So you begin editing yourself. You shrink your thoughts. You downplay your progress. Not because you're arrogant, but because you don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. And that's where the guilt begins. You start asking yourself, am I changing too much? Am I becoming someone they don't recognize? Am I leaving people behind just by moving forward? Here's the truth: most people never say out loud. Outgrowing others doesn't mean you think you're better than them. It means you're no longer the same version of yourself that fit into the old dynamic. And dynamics don't break loudly. They fade. You used to bond over the same struggles, the same fears, the same frustrations. But now you're solving problems they're still stuck inside. You're asking questions they're avoiding. You're choosing discomfort in ways they're not ready for. And suddenly, you feel like the odd one out, even though you're the one who changed. So you start feeling responsible for the distance, for the silence, for the shift. But growth doesn't ask for permission. It just happens. And when you grow, you don't just gain clarity, you gain awareness. You start noticing patterns you once tolerated, emotional loops you once laughed off, behaviors you once normalized but can no longer ignore. That awareness creates separation, not physically at first, but emotionally. You're still in the same room, but no longer in the same place. And the worst part? You miss them. You miss who they were to you. You miss who you were with them. The version of yourself that didn't overthink every interaction, that didn't feel guilty for dreaming bigger. Because here's the uncomfortable truth: growth always costs something. Sometimes it costs comfort, sometimes certainty, and sometimes people. But society romanticizes growth. It shows the glow up, the confidence, the success. It rarely shows the quiet nights where you wonder if you've become too different to belong anywhere. You ask yourself, why do I feel lonely even when I'm doing better? Why does success sometimes feel heavier than failure? And the answer isn't ingratitude, it's this: growth separates before it unites. When you outgrow others, you enter a strange emotional space. You're no longer who you were, but not yet surrounded by people who match who you're becoming. So you float, and floating feels lonely. You don't fit into old conversations, but you don't yet feel at home in new ones. And because you're empathetic, because you care, you feel guilty for the distance even when it wasn't intentional. But hear this clearly: outgrowing others is not cruelty. It's self-respect. When you choose honesty over comfort, growth over familiarity, self-awareness over avoidance. Some relationships simply can't follow. Not because the people are bad, but because the relationship was built for a version of you that no longer exists. And that realization hurts. You didn't wake up one day and decide to leave. You just stopped abandoning yourself. And that changed everything. The guilt feels heavy because humans are wired for belonging. For most of history, being cast out meant danger. So when growth threatens connection, your nervous system interprets it as loss. That's why you second-guess yourself, why you consider slowing down, why you think about shrinking back just to keep the peace. But peace that requires self-betrayal is not peace. It's postponement. Eventually, the cost becomes too high. You feel drained after conversations that once energized you, misunderstood even when you're heard, explaining yourself too much, or not at all. And that's when guilt turns into grief, because you're not just losing people, you're grieving shared futures that will never happen. Invisible grief is the hardest to explain, especially when nothing bad happened. No betrayal, no explosion, just evolution. But here's the quiet truth most people learn too late. Staying the same to protect others eventually turns into resentment, and resentment slowly erodes love. Growth doesn't mean forgetting where you came from. It means honoring it without letting it trap you. Some people will feel left behind, not because you abandoned them, but because they chose familiarity over transformation. That doesn't make them wrong. It just makes your paths different. The guilt you feel isn't proof you're doing something wrong. It's proof you're human. But caring doesn't mean staying stuck. Sometimes people don't miss you. They miss access to the version of you that made them comfortable. But discomfort isn't harm, it's an invitation. Some will rise to meet it, some won't. And that's not your responsibility to control. Growth isn't a competition. Your evolution doesn't erase anyone's worth. It simply reveals alignment, or the lack of it. And alignment matters more than history. You can love people deeply and still accept they cannot walk where you're going. You can honor memories without forcing a future that no longer fits. Because if you shrink to keep others comfortable, you don't save the relationship. You just lose yourself quietly. And losing yourself is a far heavier loss. Outgrowing others is not the end of connection. It's the beginning of a more honest one, starting with yourself. And in the end, that is not something to feel guilty about. It's something to respect.